research on Charlie Hebdo. Do you want to get into the geopolitical terrorism?
Yeah, let me just talk about this for a second.
Okay.
On the 7th of January, a week ago today, we had this murderous terrorist attack on this French magazine. The first obvious thing to say is we condemn terrorism. We are interested in fighting terrorism, preventing terrorism, and actually exposing the networks that bring terrorism about. And these are unfortunately not the ones that the mainstream media are often naming. Now, what happened with this was the news began to hit here in the United States around 11 a.m., noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, January 7th. And I began putting out tweets.
Within hours.
Within that same day, in English and in French, and putting out this analysis, which is the following. The president of France, Hollande, had held a press conference for the new year, right? To launch the political season for 2015, and he had made some important statements which have not been included in the Anglo-American news coverage. So let me just go through those very quickly right now. It's a 2-hour interview by Hollande on the Monday, right? So Monday, January 5th.
And this happens Wednesday.
And then the terrorism happens on Wednesday, right? So 2 hours to France Inter. It's written France Inter. That's the most listened to French radio station. So first of all, he starts talking about Putin, and you got to realize this is really heavy-duty stuff. Hollande says, Mr. Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He has told me that. What he wants is to remain influential. What he wants is for Ukraine not to fall into the NATO camp. So in other words, if you're willing to recognize a Russian sphere of influence where NATO will not penetrate, you can have a very good, peaceful coexistence. So that's already an attack on the British Foreign Office, the British government, the State Department, the Obama administration, Kerry, Susan Rice, all these people, right, who have been pushing sanctions. Apropos of sanctions, Hollande says, I think the sanctions, and this means the economic sanctions against Russia, supposedly about Crimea, eastern Ukraine, I think the sanctions must stop now. Now, that's a mouthful. I think the sanctions must stop now, essentially says, London, go to hell. Washington, go to hell. We're going to act on our economic interests. We are France. We're independent. And we're not taking orders from you. This is the language of de Gaulle. And, of course, Hollande is no de Gaulle, but he's a very desperate politician with a terrible popularity, 15 or 20%, most polls. Maybe he, in his desperation, has decided to strike out in a way that's going to resonate with the French voter, right, with the deep-rooted French nationalism, right, La France profonde. So he says, I think sanctions must stop now. They must be lifted if there is any progress. If there is no progress, then the sanctions will remain. But then he said he was going to go to a meeting in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, and that was a meeting with President Putin of Russia, whom he now believes, right? Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He told me that. So Putin's new friend is Hollande. Hollande will be there, and the conference is Hollande, Putin, Poroshenko, the guy I call Pornoshenko, right, of Ukraine, this fascist leader of Ukraine, and Merkel of Germany, okay? And that lineup alone would have been very bad for Ukraine. Essentially, what Hollande was announcing was the collapse of the entire State Department Kerry sanctions regime against Ukraine. Now, I have to point out, we had the killings then, the murder spree, terror in Paris, Charlie Hebdo, the kosher supermarket, the printing plant, right? You followed all this stuff. 17 people dead. We condemn it. And we condemn it above all because it succeeded. In other words, on Sunday, this past Sunday, we had Merkel come out and say, there will be no Astana summit. That meeting about Ukraine will not take place. Meaning, it succeeded. Of course, the suspicion has to be the cui bono, right? The cui prodest, right? Who benefits from this? Who wanted it? You have to suspect that it's the U.S. and the British that are actually behind this terrorism, simply because they're the ones who need to discipline continental Europe, right? Force continental Europe to obey the dominant Anglo-American line, which is for confrontation with Russia. Now, let me just add a couple of other things that he also says. He talks about Libya, and he says, oh, a lot of people, they're trying to convince me to invade Libya, says Hollande. He says, I don't like to invade Libya. I'm not going to do it alone. I won't do it. Now, after Charlie Hebdo, we're told that the French General Staff has started to plan an invasion of Libya. This is under the leadership of a guy called General Puga, P-U-G-A. General Puga of France is planning this. The aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is now steaming in the Mediterranean. We don't know where it's going. And, of course, once you've been attacked on this Charlie Hebdo thing, and you've got ISIS claiming they did it, and al-Qaeda in Yemen claiming that they did it, then the question is, are you going to retaliate, right? Are you going to bomb somebody? Bombing is pretty much the rule. So will France do that? If they do that, that will be political suicide for Hollande, and it could lead then to a wider war. The other thing that Hollande said in this interview was that he's not worried about Greece, that the Greek people have the right to choose the government that they want, and he hopes that they will meet their international obligations, but that he's not worried about it. And you have to know, the background for that is the Syriza party of Alexis Tsipras, people that we agree with on many issues, they're going to become the government of Greece. On the 25th of January, Alexis Tsipras, this will be the first left-wing anti-austerity government in Europe in many decades. It's explicitly to reject the austerity dictates of the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission. And this will tend to blow the lid off the austerity measures that have been put in against Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and indeed in France, and to some extent here in the U.S., right? The sequester is also under attack at that rate. And you have to understand also the entire election strategy of the Greek right-wing party, the so-called New Democracy, the pro-IMF, pro-austerity party of this guy Samaras, their whole strategy was to say, don't vote for Syriza. If you do, Greece will leave the euro. They'll be forced out. We'll have chaos. That'll be the end of the world. You'll starve, so don't do it. A strategy based purely on fear. But wait a minute. Here's the president of the French Republic saying, there's nothing to worry about. Let them vote for who they want. And Merkel was apoplectic, we know, and others, the IMF people, I'm sure, were apoplectic. So here you've got the French president bucking Washington and London, saying, I'm not going to obey you on Russia, on the sanctions, on Greece, on Libya, and all these issues. That's a rebellion. And in my experience, and this goes back a ways now, going back to de Gaulle in the 60s and 70s with all those assassinations.
Reminiscent of the Situationist International.
The Situationist International were not part of the terrorism. Charlie Hebdo is straight out of the Situationist International. But the point is, when London and Washington see a rebellion, if the Greeks are rebelling against the IMF, if Hollande is rebelling against the sanctions, that's when geopolitical terrorism comes into play. Against de Gaulle, against Aldo Moro in Italy in 1978, this is how they do it. Some people may come and say, but isn't it mainly about Israel? The answer is no, it's not about Israel. It's about keeping U.S.-British domination of continental Europe and other areas, because that's what they really are concerned about, right? That's the heart of their interest complex, right? What they must defend at all costs, and here they're doing it. So when I put this stuff out on the Wednesday, I think this began to become hegemonic. In other words, it began to become the dominant analysis. And if you want to see some reflections of this,
you did the first full-length interview and big radio analysis that evening, and that interview began to take over.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it started to become hegemonic. And what you find then is a guy that we know, right, a friend,
Stuart Hooper
of the 21st Century Wire. Right. They essentially repeat what my sort of analysis, 21st Century Wire, SGT report, They have it too, and any number of others. Then, however, there's a counterblast of people who are trying to sell you, I think, a bunch of nonsense. And the people who are trying to muddy the waters, they start focusing on things like, well, wait a minute, is that film authentic? And if the film is not authentic, what does it mean? Now, I don't want to go into the analysis of the film because it's a waste of time. There are problems with the film, to be sure. But what you can't do, and this we learned this in the decade after 9/11, you cannot
You're
start,
speaking about the film where the police...
lots of films. Let's just talk generally about it. You can't start from a film and say, if a film is fake, it means something didn't happen in the real world. This is not how reality works. In other words, if you say, oh, the film of the U.S. astronauts on the moon is a fake, it may be a fake, but that does not mean the U.S. did not get to the moon, right? They certainly, if you're an event planner, you say, well, we're going to go to the moon, but we want to have our propaganda film ready to go and edited so we can shoot it out and get the biggest impact, right? We can shape how people respond to it. It's got to be there.
So you don't have to tinker with making a film while you're trying to land on the moon. You can make sure that you have something for people to view.
Right, and when you're whether people are actually, I think it is clear that lots of people got killed in Paris. That's all I can say. Lots of people got killed, and let me tell you something about them. Charlie Hebdo, of course, is a scurrilous magazine, but this is the French tradition. It goes back to the libertines. It goes back to Voltaire in certain ways. People very, very dubious, right? Voltaire was an awful guy. If you can understand French, I urge you to get the tape by the distinguished French historian, the late Henri Guillemin, Guillemin. This guy gives you the lowdown on Voltaire. Voltaire is an absolute scoundrel, but that's neither here nor there. This Charlie Hebdo comes out of the Vichy tradition, Marshal Pétain, French fascism. And they were anti-de Gaulle from the word go in 59, 60, 61. And they've gone through various, transmogrifications and rebirths. But more recently, this is a magazine that is heavily embedded in the French ruling class, the ruling elite. And this is important. The former editor of Charlie Hebdo is a guy called Philippe Val, V-A-L. He is now the director, the boss of France Inter Radio. So it's like going to become the head of CBS News or something like this, or CBS Network in general. So you can see it's a very high-level thing. This guy, Sharp, right, the cartoonist who got killed, his girlfriend, or the woman who says she was his girlfriend, there's some question about it, is this woman, Bougrab, B-O-U-G-R-A-B. You see her on television now. She was actually a cabinet minister in the Sarkozy government. She's a right-wing former cabinet minister, or at least, deputy, undersecretary, something like this, in Sarkozy. So what happened is that people in the middle of the French elite have been killed. This is the significance, because this is a warning to France in general, right? You have to think about France historically, right? France is an exceptional country. It's not an obedient conformist country. It's the opposite. De Gaulle has shown this, right? And there's France that can say no. No to London, no to New York, no to Washington. And that spirit, I think, was somehow peeping up even with Hollande. And again, Hollande is not a good guy, but Hollande is also desperate, and he's flailing. Who knows? Maybe he decided to do something that turns out to be good. After this interview, there's a paper somewhere, I think in Turkey, called the Sabah, the new Sabah, and it says France has to choose between NATO and Russia. And this also has to do with these aircraft carriers, right? Amphibious support ships of the Mistral class. France has built 2 ultra-modern sort of light aircraft carriers and wants to sell them to Russia. The U.S. and the British say no. Hollande is under huge pressure, and what he was really announcing was that he's probably going to deliver those carriers. But right now the carriers are off the screen. So what you can see is that policy has changed in ways that have nothing to do with Charlie Hebdo, nothing to do with free speech, nothing to do with the Middle East. It's all about Russia, France and Russia. That's the heart of the matter.
So people are missing the entire big picture when they focus on Israel.
Yes, obviously quite a few people are obsessed with Israel. Let me point to this.
Yeah, let's go into that for a second.
You have a bunch of people, especially in Europe. I would call these people decadent in the sense that they don't want to be identified with the establishment, right? They say, I'm not Hollande, or I'm not Obama, or I'm not the government where I live. So they have to differentiate themselves from the governing majority. However, they are not sympathetic to labor. They're not sympathetic to the third world. They don't want rising standards of living. They don't want third world development, right? They're not interested in any of that. What they can do is become raving critics of Israel. They can become Israelophobes. Mm-hmm. And with that, they can say, you see, I'm not part of the establishment. And they can feel, when they're dealing with somebody like Netanyahu, they can say, I feel like I'm morally superior. So it's a cheap trick to try to acquire some kind of moral superiority. And again, Netanyahu is certainly, what can we say? He's a scoundrel. But is he a bigger scoundrel than other world leaders? It's not so clear. Interesting is that the guy who tells you that the Mossad did this, right? Whenever something like this happens, somebody comes out and says, the Mossad did it, right? Some people say that every time anything happens, they're out there telling you that the Mossad did it, right? Whether the Mossad has the capabilities or, they're not interested in that. Here's the thing. The guy who talks about this is the mayor of Ankara, Turkey. His name is Gülçek. The mayor of Ankara, Gülçek, Turkey, right? Mm-hmm. He says the Mossad is behind the Paris attacks. Now, I just have to say, this is Turkey. This is a country which is currently run by the Muslim Brotherhood, okay? And these are not good people. These are the people who brought you ISIS, right? That's who that is. And Erdogan of Turkey, of all the leading people in the Middle East, he is one of the most heavily identified with terrorism. He supports ISIS. He lets ISIS operate on Turkish territory. They cross that border whenever they want to. They can even go to Turkey and fire on Kobani and kill the Kurds, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to obviously not value, not honor this stuff from a Turkish mayor who, for all we know, is in the Muslim Brotherhood himself. I also have to add, if you've ever seen this CIA operate in the Middle East, the most basic cover story of the CIA is if a bomb goes off, let's say some Lebanese politician is killed, right? It's happened in recent years. The CIA line will be, we didn't do it, the Mossad did it. We wouldn't do something like that, says the CIA. That's not our style. That looks more like the Mossad. And you'll hear this from these guys again and again and again, and I think it's time to get
So
wise.
when you take the Israel bait, then you're siding with the CIA.
In effect, the answer to that is the people who automatically blame everything on the Israelis will say, well, their comeback is, if you don't blame everything automatically on the Israelis, then you are from the Mossad.
You're a Mossad sympathizing Zionist shill for Israel.
Like this.
Yeah.
Right.
When you try,
the Mossad does do things, right? The Mossad does carry out attacks, and they've been caught doing them. So we're not arguing that that's not it. It's just that this idea, this mechanical repetition, the Mossad did it, would blind us to the fact that there's really something new going on, that the French establishment elite was actively considering breaking out of this straitjacket of Atlanticist obedience and doing something strategic and big and positive, right, to break up this momentum towards, in effect, World War III in Europe, right? We don't want any European wars. We don't want Russia against Poland and NATO joins in. This is
and you
crazy.
miss the bigger geopolitical picture.
Yes.
And when you get fixated on Israel, you forget Japan. Think of the rape of Nanking. You think what's happening in Israel with Palestine is the worst thing that's ever happened and the end-all be-all. But this has happened everywhere.
If you want to indict Netanyahu, you can do that very easily based on things that he has demonstrably done.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the attack on Gaza in this past summer and similar things, right? In other words, the Israelis have done things in Lebanon and in Gaza and in such places which are demonstrably the handiwork of somebody like Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. I would just add, there is no collective guilt. There's no collective guilt, not for Germany, not for the U.S., not for Russia, not for the Israelis. Crimes are the responsibility of the individuals who commit them, okay? Not of entire peoples. That is absolutely crazy. So we are extremely critical of Netanyahu, to be sure. But what you cannot have is this stupid Pavlovian reaction. Something happens, blame the Mossad. No, that's too simple. Sometimes that will be right, but that's going to be wrong so many times and in so many important ways that no, that is not acceptable. So I think...
Well, it's unfortunately leading to a new rise of almost neo-Nazism in America and in Europe.
There is certainly an element of this. I wouldn't want to exaggerate it. I think it gets more media attention than it's actually worth. Mm-hmm. In other words, it looms larger on the internet because this is the realm of kooks. You got to imagine several hundred middle-aged men, never married, maybe never had a job, in their pajamas and bathrobe, in the basement of their mother's house, putting this stuff out. It's also very often put out by people who have no language ability, never traveled, never been there, never been in the Middle East, never been in Europe. My background is the Moro dossier of 1978, right, which got it right, British intelligence, and then this 9/11 book, right, 9/11 Synthetic Terror. I would urge you to take a look at that, and in particular this little chart, which has been showing up now in the wake of this last event, right? People have gone back to my conceptual analysis. The patsies, well, those are these people you see, right? Kouachi and this Koulibaly and these other people. Don't base your analysis on things that they've done or not done, right? Don't worry about whether they picked up a shoe in the car or left a driver's license in the car. That's obviously sort of comical. But you can't base anything on what the patsies do. You've got to look at the strategic picture, right? What is being aimed at? Then you have the moles. It's obvious that there are Anglo-American moles. We can say CIA moles, MI6 moles in the French administration, in the French police. We had this, by the way, with Mohamed Merah a couple of years ago. This was a Frenchman of Middle East and Islamic background in Toulouse. He killed some people, killed another group of people, then he went to a Jewish school and killed some people, and he was liquidated, so he couldn't tell what it was. It turned out that he was a high-level informant of the French DCRI, which is their equivalent of the FBI, and probably also of the DGSE, their equivalent of the CIA. And he was working for famous names in France like Claude Guéant and Bernard Squarcini. These are top-level French intelligence officials. So that's one comparison, right?
I'll post this graphic of the dynamic between the patsies, the moles, and the technicians on our United Front Radio Facebook page when the episode airs, so everybody can have the graphic.
Sure, and we can find a good version of that, right? We can get a typographically good one.
Okay.
The other one is Breivik, right? Anders Breivik in Norway, right? A couple of years ago, 2011, kills a whole bunch of children of the ruling Social Democratic Party at a vacation home near, not so far from Oslo. So what was that? Well, Norway, NATO country, was part of bombing Libya, and at a certain point they said, we're tired of bombing Libya, we don't want to bomb Libya anymore. You always get this issue. The rebellion against U.S. British orders inside the NATO framework.
So it's sending a message to the countries that start rebelling. It's a sending...
The Norwegians are going to drop out of the bombing. And if the Norwegians drop out, the Dutch are also going to drop out. And you might say, well, who cares, little countries. That was about half of the planes that they had for bombing Libya. So the answer was Breivik. Get the idea?
Yeah, they're sending a message to countries that rebel against NATO.
Yeah, and I think that is the overwhelming, from de Gaulle to Moro to Breivik to this. That is the centerpiece of the analysis. There may be other things, and indeed, let me add, if you look at why this was done now, certainly the idea that Syriza is going to take over Greece is disturbing to the bankers, right, who run this entire thing. This is very disturbing.
Very disturbing.
So they would like to chill, scare you, chill political activity. For example, once you've had this murder spree in Paris, if Tsipras comes forward in Greece and says, down with the European Central Bank, or I'm kicking the IMF out, it's very easy at that point to say, you must be some kind of a terrorist, right? And this happened in the United States.
It's very interesting you're bringing that up, because
right?
I was thinking if Syriza played into this in any way. And also, I just want to make one quick note to remind people that at the end of this course on Sunday, it happens to fortuitously blend with the Greek election, and we are going to have a small celebration to celebrate the finale of the class, mixed with watching the election results come in. There's going to be a small party, so that's another little benefit you have if you come to the class. You'll be able to watch the election results with the members of the Tax Wall Street Party and Webster Tarpley. So continue, Webster.
And again, the point on this is the world needs mass leaders. This is a school for leaders, people who are not afraid of the idea of being a leader, who want to be leaders. Maybe you can develop earth-shattering intellectual powers along the way. I hope so. Mm-hmm. But the main thing is we need mass leaders to save what we've got of human civilization in a time of economic breakdown crisis, and a very severe one. So sure, Hollande essentially says, I'm not worried about Syriza, right? And that's not the party line. The party line from Merkel, from Samaras, from Cameron, and so forth is, be very scared and don't vote for them because they're really bad. There's going to be chaos. Now, just on this chill aspect, let me jump over here to the United States, because we are certainly not exempt from this. We're right in the middle of it. We're in the soup. In the past 2 days, that means the 13th and the 14th of January, we have had 2 alleged terror plots against the U.S. Congress. Yesterday, the 13th, we've had the bartender at the country club, which is frequented by the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. The bartender in this country club at some point obviously went berserk, called the police. This is a guy called Hoyt, H-O-Y-T. He tells the police that he, Hoyt, is Jesus Christ, and he's going to do away with Boehner because Boehner was mean to him at the country club, and Boehner is responsible for Ebola, says United States Capitol Police Special Agent Christopher M. Desrosiers. And this guy Hoyt has a Beretta .38 automatic that he was going to use in this project. Now, Hoyt is obviously a maniac. He's mentally unstable. He's mentally impaired. He's a mental case. Okay.
Genuinely mentally disturbed.
Yes,
So
sure.
is the other example. I'd like you to get into the other example. And
this can be psychopharmaca, right?
Yeah.
We don't know, right? But so here we have a case of some nut who says, I'm going to attack Boehner. Right? That's one. Mm-hmm. Then we have another one today, and this is a guy called Cornell. He has other names, but his name is Christopher Cornell. He's also from Ohio. It's the same area, Cincinnati, Ohio. And his plot is to blow up the U.S. Capitol, and he claims to be doing this in the service of ISIS, of the caliphate. And this is a pattern that we've seen again and again. This is obviously another patsy, another mentally disturbed, mentally impaired individual, right? He would not have the mental requirements to sign a contract or do anything like that. But what he can do is to meet with an undercover FBI agent twice in October. You can call this an entrapment. The pattern is simple. You get an isolated mental case who has no friends, no purpose, no nothing. The FBI sends in a provocateur, an entrapment agent. That agent gives these people or person in this case, attention, money, equipment, ideas, suggests to the suggestible, and that's it. So he meets with an undercover FBI agent to discuss the attack. He tells him all the things he wants to do. And as usual, the plot is aspirational.
So that's the process of how they acquire these people.
They've done it again and again. They've done it with the Haitians in the warehouse. They've done it with these poor guys, dupes in Toronto, who took delivery of a truckload of chemical fertilizer. They had the bombers in Queens who thought they were going to bomb the gasoline or kerosene pipeline leading to Kennedy Airport. There's the Fort Dix 6. Another one, they thought they were going to attack a military base. It's again and again and again, and they're always mentally impaired. And the plot is aspirational. Aspirational in the sense...
Can you explain aspirational?
They don't have the equipment. They don't have the wherewithal to do it. Now, this character supposedly bought some guns. Well, of course, anybody can do that. But they don't have any of the heavier, more complex equipment. So a lot of this is simply talk.
I see, makes sense.
The patsy gets on the phone with the provocateur, the FBI agent. He talks about this stuff, and then that's going to be enough.
And then they caught him, and then they get him. They have something.
And they get him, of course, because he's a patsy. And now that was front page news. CBS alert on the radio here in Washington, of course. You can imagine, right? Oh, a plot to attack the Capitol has been uncovered by the FBI. And that was the leading item. I only got to watch one of the three networks, but CBS had that. Sure enough, that was number one. That was leading off the news. So what's the point with that? It's the same thing. There's going to be a lot of protest against this Republican Congress, that they want to chill that in advance. And just a couple of examples. The Republicans are in the process of watering down the Dodd-Frank financial reforms. Now, remember, those are reforms that have already been watered down several times, right? Even Glass-Steagall today would not be enough, but they don't have Glass-Steagall. They have the Volcker rule, but they have the Volcker rule watered down in the budget that passed in December, and the Republicans want to water that down again. Or the Republicans, they didn't run on this, but this is what they're doing. The Republicans have, in the House at least, approved a change in the funding mechanism of Social Security, which, through a complicated process, is going to cut 20% of the average Social Security disability benefit is going to be cut.
It's shocking.
So the Republicans get control of the Congress, and they start attacking cripples and blind people and paraplegics. This is absolutely despicable. And you can imagine the groundswell of political opposition against this. But now
we're all distracted.
Now it's chilled, right? Because if you're attacking the Republicans, hey, wait a minute. Are you there with Cornell and that guy Hoyt?
Oh, I see.
Get the idea?
I see, yeah. So we're all terrorists.
Are you part of that? Don't you realize that those people are under terrorist attack and you're joining in? How dare you?
So if we attack the Republicans, it's the big chill. I see. It's very simple. It's very simple. It's a very simple equation.
It's very crude. So again, cui bono, cui prodest. Who's benefiting from this? What is this designed to do? Why now? So I think that stuff is fairly obvious.
Yeah, the Republicans cutting 20% of Social Security for disability.
For people with disabilities. And let me add for any deluded people that might still be out there. Today, little Rand Paul, the senator from Aquabuda, was up in New Hampshire. And he was asked, what's with the Social Security disability? And he covered for genocide. He said, well, you have to understand a lot of those people are faking it, right? A lot of those people pretend to have back pain so that they can get on Social Security disability. Now, that, I submit, is despicable, amoral. That is the genocidal overtone of austerity as preached by Ron Paul and Rand Paul. Here we have people who refuse to attack Wall Street. They refuse to fight to make Wall Street pay taxes or to otherwise bridle their power. And
they get all worked up about people with disabilities. They get all worked up over cripples and blind people. And they refuse to attack Wall Street.
Yeah, and again, they don't get worked up. They say, "To hell with them," right? Let them go to hell. Or you're saying they get worked up that
they get worked up and they say, "Yeah, they are faking it. I have a real, I'm working and they're not." Yeah.
I just wanted you to know that there were quite a number of websites that had gone with my analysis. Let me just mention some of them again. This 21st Century Wire, SGT reports. IntelliHub actually has a film which is largely based on my analysis, the Patsies, the Moles, and the Technicians. So I feel that there was a threat, at least, that my analysis would become hegemonic in the post-Charlie hours and days, and that some of what you see, and what I mean by this is, here's the New York Times of January 12th. Neil McFarquhar, conspiracy theories mixed with official condolences. And they go through a series they review a lot of conspiracy theories, I guess if we have to call it that, but not mine. In other words, they don't entertain the most obvious idea that it's political and it has to do with the sanctions. Or New York Magazine once did a rather sympathetic write-up of me, but here we go, a guide to Charlie Hebdo shooting conspiracy theories. And what they do is they never get to mention me, but they mention all the brand X, right, all the crackpots. I just want to, out of that article, I just want to mention one positive contribution is Thierry Masson of the French Voltaire Network. And he obviously points to the fact that the Kouachi brothers, they were ex-convicts. One of them had been in jail for 18 months. He was very well known to the police. All of them had been part of a plot to break this Belkacem, a terrorist, out of jail. This is a terrorist who had bombed the Paris subway in 1995. They were, and they were trying to get him out around 2010, 2011. So when you know the movie with the Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart and Claude Rains, and there's a scene at the end where Bogart shoots the Nazi general.
Right.
And Claude Rains famously says, "Oh, this German general has been assassinated. Round up the usual suspects."
Right.
Right? Don't arrest Humphrey Bogart.
Right.
Well, these guys, Kouachi brothers and Koulibaly, those are the usual suspects. Those are the people. That's a terror cell, so-called, of patsies that any serious police department would have been monitoring minute by minute, second by second. And instead, they're able to do it. One of the Kouachi, had been in Yemen and had been trained, we're told, by Anwar al-Awlaki. And when we say Anwar al-Awlaki, we've got to say his full name, which is al-Awlaki the CIA lackey. And through my efforts, that is what he is known as on quite a few important radio programs. Al-Awlaki the CIA lackey, who was even Jeremy Scahill, who is one of the most superficial and meretricious of all writers on this, even Scahill has conceded on television interviews with Amy Goodman that al-Awlaki, he says, probably a U.S. double agent.